Hey, are you there? It's me. I got a story to tell you. A long, long time ago, well, maybe it was 2009, at a conference far, far away, well, maybe it was Vancouver, this young educational technologist came to the Open Education Conference with a different kind of presentation. So I did this thing back in 2009, and this is the thing. I went to the Open Ed conference in Vancouver. I wanted to go to the conference really bad, and I wasn't too sure what to talk about. And so, like, things on the program and people were doing wasn't really stuff I was doing. I was really into, whatever, I don't remember. Digital storytelling was a big thing for me. And so the power of storytelling, but also how it played out on the web, I was really, really curious about. The other thing was, in dealing with faculty and other people in education, I was thinking a lot about these barriers to sharing. And it sounds pretty simple. But what I found is, and what I did in a couple presentations where I talked about, the benefits of sharing, the things we get about it, stuff we're still talking about today. I put up, I learned this from Dave Cormier, this thing that we used to do. You put up a blank screen in an online presentation space, and you ask people just to put words on a whiteboard. And so the question was, what are your barriers to sharing? And I still bring up this screenshot again and again, because even in 2023, some of these things come true. And really it's about this question, like, does my stuff have value? Is my stuff as good as anybody else? Am I really, is anybody amazing? Does anybody say that they're amazing? But amazing things happen. And that was the premise for this first iteration of Amazing Stories back in 2009. And it was things that I had experienced in being on the internet very early and posting things online and sharing. And occasionally, something would happen out of the blue that I didn't expect from the thing that I shared. So the classic story, and I'm going to skip it this time because it's really good. But another one that I went back to that sort of inspired me to think about what I did at Open Ed was this thing that happened 2004, I think. One of the things that I had from my long ago days of doing geology is I went through Death Valley, and there's a picture there of my old Ford Maverick parked next to a line that said sea level. So actually, look, I have the actual photo. This is a real photograph. This is the thing that we used to do with these things called cameras that had film that you put inside, that you took pictures. And what happened was, I put this on a website. I didn't even think about it. 2004, I get this email from this guy named Bernie from Germany. I'm in a band called The Sea Level, and we found this photo of yours on the internet, and we want to know if we can put it on our album cover. And then a couple months later, in the mail, look what I got. This is a CD. This is the band called The Sea Level, and this is their CD of Beach from last summer. And that's my car on there, and if you open it up, you probably won't be able to see this. If I can zoom in, it probably won't show up, but I get liner note credits. Front photography by Levine. So when I commented this in 2005, when I blogged about it, I think this is really the fitting thing. So now, how else could a band in Germany locate on a web server in Arizona a 17-year-old photo of a 22-year-old car sitting next to a sign in Death Valley bearing the name of their band? Only on the internet. And even then, I was using that word, amazing. And this is, to me, one of my most favorite, completely accidental, amazing. These are the things that inspired me to bring this presentation to the Open Ed conference. And so, thinking of my influences on digital storytelling, I go back, and fortunately I got a chance to meet Dana Atchley at a conference in the mid-90s. And he would do this on-stage performance. Now, he was brilliant. I mean, he was from the theater, and he had this whole range of stories that he would tell. But he would sit up on stage, and he had sitting there an old TV set with a flickering looping video of a campfire. And it was just this metaphor of a digital campfire. And I thought he had kind of like a interactive jukebox. So it wasn't like going through slides or going through videos. And he would decide like, oh, I want to tell this story, or I want to tell this story. And his assistant in the back would pull up some kind of multimedia display. And so I was like thinking, how could I do that? And so I stumbled across this thing that was available back then called Cool Iris. Dead now, it's a Flash thing. But it was perfect for what I wanted to do. But allowed me to put media onto a web page that you can navigate in sort of like this 3D pane. But I could also step through it linearly, but I could also pick things at random. And to me, this was like, well, trying to be like Dana Atchley. So I had this thing, and it worked brilliantly at Open Ed. I didn't just want to like play videos. And so I got to go back. I had these series of things that happened, and I said, well, does it happen to other people? And so back then, what do? You write blog posts, maybe like Twitter was new. It was still kind of exciting. Like it was like no one really knew, took it seriously. And back then, the way I did these stories was we'd have to go, we'd get on a Skype call, and I'd use a little software to record it. And so I would end up with video that I edited and I put up on this hand-spun HTML site that's still there, it still works. A lot of them happened, from people that I asked, but occasionally people would sort of find out about this somehow, and they would send them to me. So I'm not just going to sit here and play them back for you, but I'm just thinking about some of those early ones, and I got to go first to my good friend Darcy Norman, who inspired me in so many ways. And his story talks about how he was bicycling to his dentist in Calgary, and he went over this bridge that went over the highway.
Pull it out, take a shot, bundle up, go to the dentist, don't think much about it. I get to work and I post the photograph online, where all of my photographs get posted using a Creative Commons license. I was contacted a few months later by an editor of a small newspaper in my province called Alberta Views magazine. I'd never heard of the magazine before, but the editor contacted me and said, we found the photograph on Flickr, and it actually illustrates very well an article that they wanted to publish. Could they use the photograph? Absolutely. I said, it's under Creative Commons, help yourself for free.
That's small, and like it seems pretty trivial for now, but the fact that's how the internet should work, right? People created these things in the normal sort of ongoing practice of their work, and then it just sort of happened that it got rippled out, or people found use in it, and they contacted some of these people and said, hey, can I use it? And people are like, yeah, why not? I'm not looking to like make money off of this stuff. I'm into sharing. And that was me. So I did. My good friend and colleague, Barbara Ganley, tells a story about a writing assignment that gets personal. And here, her story was kind of like one of her memories of an 8th grade dance story. And some kind of fiasco happened with the dress that she wore, and some kids were kind of cruel and made fun of her. And she said that when she wrote it, she didn't really think about it, but she kind of, used the names of some of the kids in her class. And within not too long, she got an email from one of the students.
Happened and was apologizing 40 years later for something that he didn't even remember happening. And I thought, this to me is one of those moments where you realize that what you say on the web can have a real effect. It's not just that you'll be found and your private information will be cast about in the wind, but that you will say something that has something to do with someone else, and they will be moved enough to reply to you. And
that was then, and I did this a couple times, and I kind of kept dredging out this. And so the first 2 generations of this, or 3, I did it as a website. I then kind of flipped it over into a WordPress site that I maintained. And my latest incarnation, about 6 years ago, created with one of these things called a splot. Okay. Rather than people sending me videos or videos I had to record and send me, they could create them themselves. They could be videos. It could be video. It could be audio. It could be a picture that they upload and write a story. Format doesn't matter. I just want the story. And so I thought this was a great way to collect them. I thought they would come in by the truckload. It'd be easy. And what I found is, like, again, people don't think their stories are amazing. And I don't know, I think amazing is a problem. Here we are in 2023, and I'm pulling this out again. And I have to admit, I'm a little bit wondering at myself, because, like, these things, they still happen to me, okay? I have this one that happened recently, and it's from an older blog post. I was visiting my friend Nancy White in Seattle, and I was just walking down the street in the neighborhood, and I looked up at this building, and I saw this this sign that says W.F. Schumacher. It wasn't too long. I found a 1947 paper that said it was a home bakery, W.F. Schumacher and Son, and it had the address. So I kind of like took the address and I put it into Google Street View and tried to see if I could find it. Tried to see if I could find it in some old images. So this is me getting curious about the rabbit hole. And so actually William Schumacher was this guy known as Baker Bill. And this guy was a legend. And the more I learned about Baker Bill, it was just like incredible how people talked about his bakery items. But he also did these things. He was a water skier, and he did these things. Apparently, they started water skiing, and they did it by nailing tennis shoes to pieces of wood and then get attached to a boat. So the comments come in. My friend, Sandy, who lived in the area, she knows it well. Nancy, who was my host there, and then look at this, Bonnie Childs. She's the second daughter of Baker Bill. And so she talks about remembering that she's been to her grandfather's Germany, where the baking tradition started. And then another one, Anna Peterson, is Baker Bill's fourth daughter. She found my blog post. Julie Nichols, she worked as a pastry chef in the 80s with Baker Bill. Years go by, but just, last month, this guy named Dave said that he remembers going to Baker Bill's and talks about the Boston cream pie. And this is small, but the fact that my blog post sits out there and somehow people searching or people who know Baker Bill or Schumacher come across this and have this connection, that's the thing I still live for. And I don't know, I'm starting to think maybe it doesn't matter. So what I did was, for this I went back to some people who were in that first generation, and it was really interesting. Well, actually, it's a little bit disappointing. One blogger, and I won't mention their name, sort of commented and felt like, I've told all my stories. I do it all the time. I really don't have anything to say. I don't even know why you're looking for these things anymore. I was like, okay. My friend Tom Woodward, he was in that first collection.
All my pictures up on Flickr under Creative Commons license. And one day I got an email through Flickr from someone in Russia, of all places, who was looking to use a picture of a book I took in the University of Richmond library in a nationally published magazine over there called Hermitage. And I gave my permission, just kind of excited to see it be published or used by anyone, honestly. And they were kind enough to send me 2 copies of the magazine, one in Cyrillic and one in English. So, and I'll get little comments like this. Hey, I used it in my Medium post. And, it's not a big deal, but it is. It's cool, and it brings me back to the picture, and it reminds me that this stuff is still valuable. It's out there, it's interesting, and if nothing else, it just makes me look at that picture and think about the day.
Another person, Stephen Downs, was in the first series, and Stephen is legendary. Legendary, right? Legendary. Okay. So I had recorded this video with him. I think we were at a conference together in Hawaii. And so he told this story of how, early in his career, he had to create something as a sort of a demo to sort of be what could be put online. And he'd written something a long time ago for teaching a philosophy class about logical fallacies. So he puts this thing online, and sort of this is a proof of concept for some work he's doing at Assiniboia College, because he's doing early web development in the mid-90s. Stephen was ahead of the curve. And years later, he gets an email from a philosophy professor in Australia who was really impressed with this article on logical fallacies. He invites Stephen to come to Australia 3 months for a fellowship. A free trip to Australia. And so Stephen gets to go there. He meets people. He gets tapped into the ed tech scene in Australia.
I go to Tasmania. It's like a whole world opens up for me. And I come back and I get this job offer to work for the National Research Council. One of the criteria is international experience, which I've just had because of this. So this 3-month stint at the University of Melbourne that I got, which completely created a career for me, I got strictly and solely because in 1995 I took something neat that I had written for my college course, put it online, and made it available to the world.
And so I asked Stephen, what to think about it. And so, Stephen, as he is, he sent me an email. And it was like, well, it's really not that special. This is what about sharing openly is just what you did. It's what characterized the bulletin boards and open forums. It's how we exchange software and ideas for support. The idea of blocking access or charging money didn't make sense because it meant people wouldn't get to see what you're sharing. What's the point of that? So he says, I don't know what he would have done because this made his entire career because of this. So that's the other side of openness, I think, what I've become. The world has been truly generous with me, not with money, but with what I really value. Knowledge, insight, feedback, friendship, and trust. This has changed me in more ways than I can count. Made me more reflective, more considerate, more embracing of different values, cultures, and beliefs. I can't imagine a greater gift. And then one I couldn't help but add, and to me, honestly, Cable Green's story of what happened between him and David Wiley is absolutely hands down the ultimate story of amazing openness. And I'll leave it to you to listen because there is a podcast recording they did with Terry Green, great blog posts. But in essence, Cable shared openly on a blog how he had been diagnosed with a liver disease, and the only solution was a transplant. And they did the testing of all possible donors in his family and friends, and the best match came from his longtime colleague and mentor, David Wiley. And this story about what they did for each other, and the sharing of a vital organ is sort of like a thing, and they make jokes about 5 R's and other kinds of things, but to me, it's one of the most beautiful stories out there. And Cable was kind enough just to let me write it up because I think it stands on its own. Now that is really amazing. And so I come back to this thing and I wonder, I think amazing is just the wrong word. And the sense I get from some people when I talk about this is in 2009, this was what happened. Things were new. Like the fact that you write something on a blog or share a photo on an open sharing site and someone comes across it, it was novel. It was a new thing. And so the early internet and even the middle age internet made that really stand out. Then we get this sort of back in the good days of Twitter and social media when it was very productive and it wasn't driven by all this greedy business BS. And it was we weren't worried about machines stealing our jobs and all that stuff. But I think what happened was these kinds of things that I relate and sort of still happens to me, they became a thing that became ordinary. It happens all the time in Instagram and probably Facebook. I don't know. I'm not on Facebook and other media where you have these short exchanges. You meet people you don't know. They do small things and sort of you have these mini things and it's really not a big deal. And so it almost brings me back to this brilliant video Derek Sievers called Obvious to You, Amazing to Others.
I continue to do my work. I tell my little tales. I share my point of view. Nothing spectacular, just my ordinary thoughts. So one day someone emailed me and said, I never would have thought about that. How did you even come up with that? It's genius. Of course I disagreed and I explained why it was nothing special. But afterwards, I realized something surprisingly profound. Everybody's ideas seem obvious to them. I'll bet even John Coltrane or Richard Feynman felt that everything they were playing or saying was pretty obvious. So maybe what's obvious to me is amazing to someone else.
And so what I think now is these kind of little stories, they happen so much. to us, and it's really not anything that stands out anymore. But even with that, even if they're not amazing stories, I got to stop using amazing because it's a little bit too overbearing. I think they're still important, and I'm still dedicated to doing what I can to celebrate them, to do things that can possibly make them happen. And so I go back to something that I always told audiences when I spoke in front of audiences when I did these things, is like, you can't like go about doing these things. You can't write up a blog post or send something out, the heck, even on LinkedIn, right? Okay, I guess it can happen on LinkedIn. You don't want to go about there thinking like, okay, if I do this, someone's going to find it and they're going to publish it. Or someone's going to find this and invite me to go to Australia. That can't be the reason you do it. The amazingness comes in the accidental, the things you didn't expect that catch you by surprise. And that's still there. That has to be there. Machines can't do that. AI can't feel what I'm feeling when this happens. And this is one of the most human things that we can do. I don't know what it means going forward. I think it's time for me to hang up the amazing stories. I'm just going to take it and I'm going to close my book here on the amazing stories. I'm never going to present it again. I'm never going to pitch it again. And I'm just going to put it on the shelf and leave it there.